Now let's speak to Tory MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge and co-chair of the New Conservatives caucus, Miriam Cates. I've got a feeling, Miriam, that you're going to be agreeing with Simon there in terms of his emphasis on tackling children's access to social media platforms rather than just removing their phones.
So I agree with very much of what Simon said, and I do agree that a lot of the problem is the content that children are looking at. But nonetheless, I do think it's very important that children do have at least 6 hours a day where they don't have access to that content. And I think we also need to recognise the addictive nature of mobile phones. I think the average child gets something like 230 notifications a day. That's a dopamine hit every 4 minutes. And whilst a lot of schools do have good and highly effective policies, I do know personally of schools, primary schools even, where children hide their mobile phones so that they don't have to hand them in, and they go out to their coats or their bags at break time and check their notifications. So, I used to be a secondary school teacher. I took a career break over a decade ago, and I don't envy my colleagues who are in this position now, where the vast majority of children are in possession of something highly addictive, highly inappropriate, something that's distracting them from the school day. So whilst this guidance isn't statutory, I do think it gives cover to head teachers. It sends a signal that phones shouldn't be in school. So it is a step forward, but I absolutely agree. It's not going to be the entirety of the solution to this problem.
What Simon was saying is that it actually already exists to an extent because of the fact that this is not statutory. So is there actually any new news here at all, or is it just a headline as he suggested?
I do think the guidance does set out some options for school, and certainly any protections, any insurance protections are very welcome, because some of these iPhones that children have are worth well over £1,000. Children are very reluctant to hand them over, and often parents are reluctant for the children to hand them over. So I think that's important for schools. But this is really about giving cover to head teachers to send the signal that phones are not welcome in schools. But it isn't enough. And I think one of the things that Simon said, that I've heard other guests on your station say today, is that a lot of the problems in school are being caused by social media outside of school. So even if we were entirely successful in banning phones from ever coming on school premises again, it still wouldn't solve this problem of the bullying, of the damaging content, of the self-harm, of sadly the hardcore porn that children are watching outside of school, and the problems that that's not only creating in school, but of course for their well-being in life. And so that's why I would support a total ban on social media for all under 16s, as Florida, for example, are considering, and other countries are considering too. But I think to do that, you would have to restrict smartphones, because they, of course, are the source of these platforms.
Do you worry? You say a total ban. Do you worry about accusations of kind of creating a nanny state? Is it up to government to ban something that, exists? Isn't it up to government to actually develop a way in which we can safely, and in this case, children, safely use what already is out there?
I think we recognise across society that there are some freedoms and products that children can't have access to because they're not safe. So things like cigarettes, alcohol, you can't legally drive before you're 17. We have an age of consent for sexual activity of 16. These are things that we acknowledge as a society that children should not be able to access, and we regulate that using the law. And so I think the question is not, is this nanny state, but do smartphones and social media reach the threshold of harm that means that we must use regulation and legislation to protect children? And again, I would go back to the evidence of the addictiveness of smartphones, the problem of particularly pornography. We know that over 50% of child sexual abuse now is committed by other children. Even if your child does not have a phone, and even if your child does not have social media, that doesn't protect them from the harms of other children watching and copying pornography. So I feel that we very much have reached that threshold of harm, and that is why we should be considering this regulation.
But Miriam, isn't that what the Online Safety Bill, which, has taken its time getting through Parliament, but, is finally in place, isn't that what it's meant to be tackling?
Partially, and I think that there may be some improvements from the online safety bill. It certainly should become far harder for under 13s to access social media. That will be a step forward. Social media companies should face much stricter punishments for allowing some of the harmful material on their sites. So those are improvements, but fundamentally, they will not prevent children from accessing social media and all the problems that come with that. And in some ways, although I welcome some aspects of the Online Safety Act, it did miss a trick in these areas, particularly when it came to pornography. But it's never too late to protect children, and that's what we've got to join together to do. And I think it's really interesting over the last few weeks how some of these ideas have come together into a movement. And I'm sure your listeners will be aware of a new movement that started and gone viral organically amongst parents about preventing children from having smartphones. It seems that a time is coming when parents are just at their wits' end, when the evidence for the harms being caused by smartphones and social media is gathering pace. We've had those hearings in the United States where Mark Zuckerberg was quizzed about Facebook and Meta and its problems for children. And it feels like we're getting to the point now where people are starting to realise that these harms can't go on and we have to act collectively.
It's ironic, though, isn't it, that the movement you describe has gone viral on social media. I wonder, whether you think government has, in that case, let down the families of children who've died as a result of social media. Because, even the online safety bill, it's taken such a long time to actually be pushed through. And in that time, a whole generation of kids have grown up. What would your message be to someone like Brianna Shahay's mother?
Of course, these stories are absolutely tragic and parents' worst nightmares. And in part, the Online Safety Act and some of the amendments that we managed to get through, some backbench MPs managed to get through, were in response to terrible tragedies like that. But I think we also need to acknowledge this is a problem that's only 10 years old. In a historical and political sense, it's a very new problem. It's a technology that has swept the world and changed our children's childhood in a tiny amount of time. So, of course, we can always say the government should have acted sooner, we should have done more to prevent this. But I think we have to be honest and say this is a very new thing, and countries across the world are struggling with how to regulate such a rapidly growing transformational technology. Now, that's no excuse for not acting, but we've got to acknowledge that it is a new problem, and therefore, of course, we didn't have legislation in place even 10 years ago to deal with this because it just wasn't a thing. And so we've got to be honest about that. But there's no more excuse for delay. The evidence is now irrefutable when it comes to self-harm and suicide and all those other harms that I've mentioned. And smartphones and social media are destroying children's childhood, and we've got to act.
So just finally then, what is it exactly that you'd like to see?
I think we should absolutely prevent children from under 16 using social media. Now, that is potentially possible to do through tech companies. They have the technology to know a child's age and kick them off the platform. In fact, YouTube did that with under 13s. So that is definitely one route. I think that's the route that Florida will be attempting to use. But I don't think that's enough, because even without social media, an internet-connected mobile phone, a smartphone, can access all sorts of other harms through URLs. I spoke to a teacher the other day who told me about year 7 boys, so that's age 11, who were watching hardcore porn at the back of the classroom, having downloaded a VPN to escape the school's Wi-Fi filters. So just getting rid of social media probably isn't enough. Now, how you would ban smartphones or restrict their sale or use by under 16s, that's a complex question. We should be having a debate in Parliament and amongst lawyers about that. But I think that's where we will probably have to end up, even if we are able to ban social media. But this is a discussion we should be having publicly.